All right, Julie, I just made you host.
Okay, thank you.
So now you can drive.
All right, let me do a screen share.
Hey, Julie, this is Kelly.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Long time no talk.
Exactly. Yeah, I just made myself another cup of tea and I was like, they're gonna think I'm overdoing it today.
It's okay. I'm on my fourth.
All right, and so I'm successfully screen sharing now.
Yes, we can see
Okay.
it.
All right. All right, so I know we're going to have a couple people not with us this afternoon. Danny is not going to be able to make it, and I believe Jackie had a prior commitment. I believe the mayor had a prior commitment, and I think Michelle as well is going to try to pop in later, but may not be able to make it. So who else do we have here? I'm just going to quickly look. I know Shelly's taking attendance. I know Andy Ammons was not going to be able to make it. So we do have Mike and Derek. Davian usually pops in late because he usually needs about half an hour so and then he shops up. So we have Jeff here with us, and if let's see.
This is gonna be an easy one. We just ought to let Mike, Derek, and Jeff tell us what to do.
Yeah, that sounds good.
You guys read it? You like it? We're ready to go? We're done?
Sounds good.
I love it.
I got a few notes.
Oh, okay. Darn you, Mike.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess we'll have to go through the presentation then. So welcome. This is the kind of continuation of the group 2 review that we were doing with chapters, well, not chapters, sorry, sections 3, 6, 8, and 9, because we did not get to them 2 weeks ago. We're trying to break them up into more manageable chunks. The hope is to get us through within the 2 hours. An hour and a half would be ideal. But if we need that full 2 hours, we can. If you do need to sign off or sign out in between now and then, and due to prior commitments or other things that need to happen, feel free, as always, email me after the meeting or even during. I've got my email up, and give me your comments if you're not able to either get to them today, or as you're thinking about it later and you have more questions or comments that you'd like to say, please get them into me so we can make sure we're addressing those. So today's quick overview is going to be section 3 for zoning districts, section 6 for design and development standards. We'll probably spend a little bit more time in discussion with section 6. Section 8 and section 9 are the traffic impact and subdivision regulations. And most of chapter 8 is kind of a placeholder, and most of 9 is also a placeholder because it's heavily dictated by the general statutes. So we'll go over those. So while this section's, I know chapter 8 is only a couple of pages, but section 9 is a large group of pages. However, we don't have a lot of control over half of that. So we'll go over that, and then if you have any questions or comments, please interject, just stop me. We know by now that I can talk at length and I can talk very quickly. So if you need me to slow down or ask questions, just interject. So to get started, let me scroll down. You had the memo, so we're just going to skip over that. The first section was the zoning district, and what 160D has allowed us to do, we had this capability under 153A. 160D allows the town to have zoning districts to promote health, safety, and general welfare for the town, which enables the town to put zoning classifications on the ground so that we can not necessarily control, but we can help guide development, and we can help guide that development on certain standards. So when we get to those standards in chapter 6, chapter 3 and chapter 6 go hand in hand with what is able to happen and how it's able to happen. And we discussed section 5. I'm sorry, I keep on calling it chapter. We discussed section 5 2 weeks ago on the permitted uses and how some of this plays out into the zoning districts. So if you recall, in section 5, we had the allowable uses and we had the introduction to the zoning districts. You saw a little bit about what we were proposing. So the zoning map is going to be a kind of a label change with the zoning classifications that we have. So we're going to match the zoning classifications very carefully to what we have on the zoning map now, and then reclass to the new labels and update that map based on the new labels. So we're not really considering at this time rezoning areas or forcibly rezoning areas to a different zone. What we are looking at is making those label changes so that what is currently in like zone R3 becomes zone RHD for residential high density, so that we're doing label changes at this point instead of changing how the zoning map looks. That might come later, and of course, as people petition for new districts, as they do their zoning map amendments and they come in for conditional use permits, we'll be changing that map as well. But for the most part, we are not proposing to rezone the town. We're proposing to reclassify to the new zoning district. So I want to make sure that's clear, that we're not changing the lines, we're changing the labels on the map at this time. So with that,
And Julie,
Mhm.
I just want to add a small piece to this, is that that probably exercise is more appropriate for a comprehensive land use plan discussion anyway.
yes, yes.
Here we go again, but once this all gets done, there will be probably interest in the near future to revisit the comp plan. And then that's the better vehicle to have land use discussions, and then that would be translated ultimately to a new zoning map if we get there. So this exercise should be just a translation, as you said.
Yes.
And then we would do a comp plan overview that might translate to a new zoning map.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that. So to help with the transition, we have a chart of what is currently being proposed in the LDO and what is the current district right now in the UDO. So R1 is considered low density, so we're renaming it to residential low density. R2 is our medium density, so we're calling it medium density. And R3 is our high density, so we're moving it over to the high density. And RLD, RMD, and RHD are labels that are used in our current comp plan, so that when we do update that comp plan, we have those determinations of what we're really looking at, so those things can start to match as we move forward in these cases, because we rely heavily on the comprehensive plan and the LDO as we guide growth for the town. So having those classifications marry a little bit better helps us with the public education component, because there's no confusion as to what it is we're proposing, and you don't have to translate that on your own. The RUMH and the RMH current districts are being ported over to the RMH district. We have a UMH district that is going to be kept the same. So those are our manufactured home districts. That's where we allow mobile parks. That's where we allow mobile homes on single lots, and what size they have to be if they're on well and septic, what size they have to be if they're on water and sewer, that kind of thing. So we cannot zone out a district, we have to have these classifications in there to allow them somewhere in our town. And since we currently have the RUMH and the UMH, we're porting those over to the RMH and UMH categories.
Julie, what's the purpose of the small U and on the RUMH?
The RUMH, we had actually 2 rural manufactured home districts. We had a classification of RMH in the current district and the current UDO, and then they had done a text amendment to add in RUMH to signify the difference between the RMH and the rural RUMH.
I got you.
So it really made it messy for the labels. So we're going to clean that up as
Right.
part of the new one.
Got it.
So for section 3, there's a couple of things that we wanted to call out as staff members. There's one of the things that we do with the setbacks is you have a front setback, a side setback, a rear setback, and a corner setback. And currently our corner setbacks are 10 feet in addition to the side setback. And what a corner setback is, it's a setback for any lot that has more than one street front. So if you're a corner lot and you have 2 streets on your house, your front setback is going to be where your front door is. That's for the addressing purposes of 911. Wherever your front door faces is where you get your address from. But the other street that would be considered your corner lot, and we do have some in town that are really unique. We have tri-lots that have 3 frontages. But on a side lot, a corner side that has that right-of-way frontage, but is not addressed from that side, you do not get just the side yard of the 12 feet. We add that 10 feet additional. Part of the reason of that is because of, in case there's additional right-of-way that needs to be required, if there's additional site triangles that need to be cleared to make sure that there's visibility. So right now we do have a corner side setback, and we can go one of 2 ways with this. The corner setback we can do away with and just then have a front and 2 sides, even though it's a corner lot. We can do a front and a side with a different amount of space than 10 feet, or we can keep it as we do with the front, side, and then a side on a corner, which is the additional 10 feet. What this does in a side setback, it depends on, that's where your buildable lot size is. So if you're in the buildable lot, having that extra 10 feet for that corner side reduces what the lot owner can do on their property if they were kind of one door down on the lot and had 2 regular sides instead of the corner. Again, part of that is, so we have additional room for sidewalks and additional right-of-way if needed, and the site triangles. So there is some added protection for the town to keep it at the 10 feet. However, it does decrease the usable lot for the homeowner. And typically what we've done at this point in the current UDO is we have, for accessory structures, a lessened setback. And the lessened setback goes from the property line and does not necessarily need to be that 12 or that 22 feet. It can be 3 feet for accessory structures. The new LDO proposes that everything stays within that buildable lot line. So your side setbacks, your front and your rear setbacks are then where that accessory structure or anything else can go in on your property. So the question I have for you is, do you have any preference? Do you have any feedback? Do you have any guidance for us on whether you would like to see that corner setback keep the same, whether you'd like to see that corner setback increased or decreased, or if you just want to do away with the corner setback completely and go with just the regular sides and say all corner lots will have the front setback on where their their front door is and where they are on the street that they are addressed. And then the other two sides will be true sides. So I'm going to open it up for discussion and see if you guys have anything to add.
Julie, go ahead.
As this also, I mean, I'm kind of in favor of the keeping the corner side and just referring to it as a corner side, and similar to what it is. Accessory structures a little bit closer. I mean, 3 feet is kind of close. We see more of a 5 in a lot of other municipalities from the property lines, for those accessory buildings.
Mhm.
But keeping a corner side in place would be beneficial and keep the house, because right now I think if in places I've seen without a corner side, those corner lots, houses look like they're sitting on the street in those places. So
Right.
I'm in favor of keeping a corner side. The 10 feet plus the regular side, I think that can be dealt with. I think even if we went to something like the regular side plus 5 feet would put them at like a 17 foot in this scenario you're showing. And I think that could work and still accomplish the same thing that we're trying to do. But I think just labeling it as a true side lets them get too close. But if we count them both as frontage, that would be too restrictive.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
That was a really good, this is Kelly. And that was a really good question. That was a good direction. Mine's more of a trying to understand. So we're talking about mostly in all cases, new development, right?
Yes.
As it comes forward.
Yes.
And have we had issues in our existing UDO with this issue on corner lots?
In the time that I've been here for the last
Yeah.
8 months, we haven't had an issue with the corner lots. We've been reviewing, of course, the preliminary plats, and we've been able to enforce it. It's not so much that it's an issue. It's whether or not we want to continue with the corner side, or if we want to reduce it, increase it, or do away with it altogether. These are just conversations we need to have as we prepare for the town going forward.
Right.
So it's not so much that it's an issue that needs to be fixed. It's do we want to continue this so it's not an issue in the future?
Right. Okay. Then my question is more for Kelly, the consultant Kelly. Kelly, you heard what Mike suggested, and in your world, is that a good suggestion? I don't want to judge that, but what is Kelly, Mike's suggestion a standard practice in most communities, or what's the standard practice? LDOs. Kelly, you there? Okay. He might be there and present or is muted. I don't know, but
we do have James Zerman on the line from Kinley Horn and Associates. Not going to answer that question.
go for
Kelly.
it. Go for it, James.
Yeah.
Sorry, Julie, having technical difficulties on my end.
Oh, sorry, Kelly. Well, I'll let you go ahead and jump in on that one if you'd like.
Go ahead, James. You started. I'll chime in.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say, it really does come down to a level of community preference, and we've seen, kind of those types of measurements used. So I don't think we would have any issue, discouraging that or encouraging that. I think ultimately it's going to come down to the pleasure of the board here and the steering committee on what level of input they want to see that side setback at, that corner side setback. So.
Yeah, and the one thing I will say is there's no right or wrong answer necessarily. The thing that you start looking at is making sure you're still meeting certain standards as far as fire separation. And then I'm not going to get into compatibility, but the larger the lotter, there's a couple different things that we can always look at, especially. But yeah, as James said, it's a community preference.
And then since Mike is put it out there, Mike, just a question about your proposal. So you have good knowledge of this in our communities, and what you propose you think is best practices, and is it a good way to describe it, that it tightens up a bit, but it's fair? Is that a good way of saying?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it kind of forces it, the corner lots to be a little wider. If you've got how a neighborhood that all the lots are say 60 feet wide, and they're putting a, you know, a 60 or say a 40-foot wide product on, or whatever fits in the setback, it makes them make that corner lot a little wider. And you know, and then if somebody does face their house and have their driveway from the side street, it, you know, that would ensure that there's enough, you know, room to get the cars so they're not parking at, you know, when you stack two of them in the driveway, they're not out into the street or people trying to widen driveways too much. And that's what I've seen when places that didn't have a corner side setback and they just go to a 12-foot setback, then it's so close to the road. And some places are even, you know, less than a 12 for a side yard setback, which I guess all zoning districts will have, you know, a different side yard setback anyways.
Yeah.
And Kelly, if I can kind of add something, because Mike, you brought up a great point, and I just want to kind of augment something and add on to what you're saying. You know, one of the other things that we always have some concern about, especially if we have smaller side yards for those corner lots, is you start getting into some of the site triangle for cars
Right.
coming up to that intersection.
Right.
And, you know, Mike hit something, that I will say he hit the nail on the head, especially if you have those side entry garages. The cars end up hanging out over the sidewalk or something else at that point. So one of the things that we want to make sure we've got incorporated, which I believe we do, is, you know, if there is a garage or something like that, then there's a minimum 20-foot clearance between the front of the garage and that property line and or the sidewalk.
And Mike,
Derek, and I kind of feel the same way about the sides of these houses to make sure that if you're looking from the side that isn't the front of the house, that it almost needs to be set back as far as the next house that would be down the street. Otherwise, the other person's front yard is literally the backyard, you know, the driveways could be in the backyard of that other house. And that's always seemed odd and not very fluid to me or very spatial.
Mhm.
and my only last question for Mike would be then, so it's your perspective, Mike, this is a typical development standard and developers wouldn't blanch at this and probably make a better development.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think developers will have a lot of opposition if we had a corner side. You know, if as long as it's, you know, not too excessive, and what we're
Right.
showing, the corner side's a little bit less than the front, and so I don't think it would be too bad. You know, like you say, your corner lots end up being just a little bit wider, but that I don't think that's a bad thing in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Just from my perspective, unless somebody else has something better, I think we should go with Mike's proposal and vet it out a little bit more, but keep on working on it. And Julie, did you get all those dimensions from Mike?
I did. I wrote them down. Thank you. And we'll
Thanks,
run
Mike.
it by the board and see what they come back to. And yes, thank you, because this is good discussion, and this is exactly why we need you guys. And I think Michelle has joined us now, so good afternoon. And continue on. So in the charts that you see, and let me go to, I'm gonna scroll down real quick. So as we start talking about there are different classifications, you're going to see a chart kind of like this one where it's got the building setbacks for your front, side, rear, corner, your minimum lot width, and your lot coverage. And what we're seeing right here is everything in the chart is considered not available at this time, just because we don't have a lot coverage classification in our current code. We're leaving this open so that when we do become an MS4, or if we want to start doing some stormwater impervious surface restrictions, we can go back and update these charts. So the question right now is the steering committee comfortable at leaving it where it is right now, since it is not addressed in the current code, to leave it as it is, and just have that place in the chart so that in the future we can go back and talk about those impervious surface restrictions as we need to add them? Or is that something that you guys would like to kind of dig in deeper now as a steering committee.
Julie, it's Mike again. I think I'm in favor of just leaving it as a placeholder. 'Cause if I'm not mistaken, isn't currently the Wake County handling stormwater for Rolesville?
Yes, we have an ILA with Wake County to handle all our stormwater, and the state is redoing their stormwater, the TAR News Pam stormwater regulations. And as we continue to grow with, I think it's by 2022, 2023, we're going to be looking at being an MS4 community here in Rolesville. So once we hit those stipulations of becoming a stormwater community with the MS4, we'll have to have a place in our code to update those regulations. So we're giving that a placeholder right now. And as you will see later on, some of those stormwater regulations, we're just copying over from either our current code or what the state new rules are going to be. That way we're in compliance with what the state needs, and we have that as our go-to for our guidelines.
And Mike and Juliet, I don't want to mean to correct you, but I think based upon my previous experience, once we hit that whatever threshold and they say we shall, you typically get at least under MS4 permits I've done before, you get 5-year implementation.
Yeah, you
and
have.
So there's no reason for us, in my opinion is there's no reason for us to guess now. We ought to, when we get the call and said, you shall, then we start the clock and we go back and do everything we can. And always in my previous experiences, going back and amending the code is one of those shall steps, that 5-year period. And you'll have clear guidance then at that time, what it means and how to do it. And so to me, it feels like it's just an effort of guessing a little bit right now. And we ought to continue to do best practices or whatever we have now, but not try and guess what the rules are going to say.
Yes, that is staff's suggestion, that we just kind of leave it in as a placeholder and we move on.
I agree.
Okay. Anybody else? Hearing none, I'm going to flip the slide. We did add in cluster developments. We have something similar called a conservation subdivision. What we've talked about at kind of the staff level when Kelly, James, Danny, and I started talking about some of these sections in the cluster developments. We have gone back through the conservation subdivision and the cluster development, and we are proposing the increase from the residential low density to increase that open space from 25% to 40%. And on the residential medium density, remove the increase in density that's allowed and keep that open space requirement to the 25%. And then in the chart as well, we have talked about taking that increase the lot minimum. It currently says 8,000 square feet. We got the math a little bit wrong, so we're increasing that to 9,000 square feet to keep it consistent with the RLD classification and how much that is reduced for those lot sizes. So we're keeping that consistent across the board. So those are our kind of side tweaks that we have talked about. And if you're comfortable with the cluster developments and you're comfortable with what the staff had and consultants have kind of already looked at and said, hey, we need to change this. If you have any other comments, I'd be more than welcome to hear them now and let's discuss them. If not, know that we're making these changes in the next reiteration.
Hey, Julie, can you just real quickly go down to, and maybe for purposes of future, just help me. Could you go down to the page, the specific page that we're talking about, where this is addressed? What it says generally, if it's possible?
So here's the cluster development for the residential medium. So we're keeping this at the 25%.
Yep. Gotcha.
And on the chart, here where it says 8,000 square feet, we'll be moving this over to 9,000 square feet.
Yeah.
And here where it says the max density, we'll just be leaving the max density as it is allowed. For that section, we're not going to be telling them that, you know, that it's been able to be creased as part of the cluster. That's not quite the intent of a cluster development. So we're going to clear that language up. So I don't want to trip anybody up with that. And then going back up to the
Yeah. They all have
low density, where it says 25% here, it will be 40%, so that the low density has more open space requirement, and then the medium density has a step down in that open space requirement as you have those lot spaces, and then you don't have a cluster development in the R3. So those
and
are
the
the
proposed
changes.
and the proposed percentages are based upon just what we
The current conservation subdivision in our current UDO is at 40%.
Okay.
And in order to make it that tiered system, we went and kept the most restrictive and the most restrictive dense areas, and then stepped it up to 25%, which is typical in other communities, especially in Wake County, but also across the nation. You usually see anywhere between 17 and 30%, so we kept it at 25 and recommended that for our cluster subdivision.
I think the political support will be not to reduce it and keep it as is or increase.
And that is,
Yeah.
that is well and fine. So, and we're proposing something a little bit different so that we do have that tiered system. And if the board decides that's not what the vision is for what they want, then we can change those numbers.
Julie, just so I think I may be getting a little confused myself, but the cluster subdivision is 25 and the conservation is 40% open space. And you're proposing the low density to go to 40% open space. Is that correct for a cluster?
Yes. So we're proposing to keep it consistent with the conservation subdivision.
So is there still going to be a conservation subdivision, or you're clustering?
We do have a section for the conservation subdivision. We haven't quite meshed all that out yet. That's still one of the things that we need to talk about. If we're doing clusters, do we need conservation? And we've added it in as a placeholder now because they're basically one and the same. And if I'm wrong, somebody can correct me there, but they're basically one and the same, where it's you set aside more preserved open space in order to get your smaller lot sizes and have a little bit more room for the denser developments, so you can preserve that open space somewhere else. Like with Changers Ridge and a couple other developments that might be coming in that might be on the cusp of needing that, wanting to do smaller lots on their development, but can reserve a larger open space tract to help offset the true density per gross acre.
I guess I'm just not, or wondering the reasoning behind for a cluster subdivision and the low density going from 25 to 40% required open space. It seems like a big jump. I mean, because that's going to be the district with the largest lots. We're only getting a 5,000 square foot reduction in minimum area.
Yeah,
And
so currently under the conservation subdivision, we don't have a cluster development. We only have a conservation subdivision in our current ordinance, and it is 40% across the board. So we're proposing to keep it at that 40%, and then for the medium density, reducing the medium density to 25%.
I guess I'm just not seeing where we're in the low density district. It's going to be, it's not going to be that advantageous to do a cluster or conservation or anything to give up 40% of your land to only get a 5,000 square foot reduction.
Yeah, that was kind of something I was starting to pick up on too. And as when I look around and see what has been approved over the last year and a half here in Rolesville, and what kind of activities going on in Wake Forest, and how much frank destruction is going on out there. I really worry that we might be positioning these characteristics in a way that makes what I would say is less desirable type of development more attractive to people, and I'd prefer it to be the other way around. I prefer to see, larger lots with a lower density propensity of development than the types of homes I'm sorry, I have a slight pickiness toward Carlton Point, because those are expensive homes that are a hand's reach away from each other. And I would rather see more of the lakes of Rolesville and villages of Rolesville types of sizes of lots and space than I would more dense developments like Carlton Point, because I just think we're going to look too much like Wake Forest, and I personally have a different idea of where Rolesville should be going when it comes to open space, not only in public space, but in the residential communities as well. And I think that the homes need to, I just think our ordinances should be more attracted to building that kind of community.
All right, great conversation. Thank you, Derek.
Yeah,
And
and I'm
so
sorry that that's just kind of an opinion as opposed to an actual, direction with what's being asked here. But I guess because I don't fully appreciate how the conversation goes with percentages here and there and lot square footages, because I don't have that kind of insight into this area. It's kind of hard for me to sit back and say, oh yeah, 2,300 square feet sounds like a decent size. I just can't do that. So I have to be vague in this respect. You know what I mean?
No, that's exactly why we have these conversations, though, because we need that input on how it's going to look and feel to our community members who don't understand just from reading the text. This is what you're going to get when we say these things. So having that general overview of, you would rather have larger lots, you would rather rather not have the smaller lots, that you are looking for the more open space. You are looking for something that's going to drive the development into a choice, if you will, of how the look and feel of the neighborhood is going to be. And the look and feel of the neighborhood is going to be larger lots with, the larger homes, rather than a small lot, small home, and a very high density. So what we're looking at, and I think Mike is, if I can paraphrase Mike, and Mike, if I'm getting you wrong, then tell me, and Derek, the same for you. What I'm hearing from Mike is that why offer a cluster option if it's not going to be much of a reduction in size or density, and if it's going to be so restrictive on the open space, that why is it an option when it's not really an option? That it's, if we're going to restrict it to the 40% open space, that's only, their entire development, only 60% is then buildable by the time you have right of way and easements and all that kind of stuff, and your public utilities and everything takes a chunk of that. What you're left with is, of course, that lot size is going to be smaller, so it's going to look more dense, even if it's not per gross acre. So it talks to the look and feel of it, and if we are not really giving them too much of a discount, if you will, on what those lot sizes are going to be, then reserving that 40% for that open space is kind of not as attractive. It's not an attractive option. Now, is that what you were saying, Mike? Or
yeah, I think pretty much so. I mean, I'm just saying, if we increase the required open space too much, then it could have a negative effect, because I mean, if we had 100 acres of land, we were basically saying, okay, put 40 of it that you can't touch. And
Mhm.
but you can only go from a 20,000 square foot to a 15,000 square foot lot. And it is not going to be a big enough reduction in lot size. So I think most developers will just say, well, I'll just put 20,000 square foot lots on the whole 100 acres and not dedicate any, or, we'll just dedicate the was it the 10% or something that's required by the provision?
Yeah.
So by increasing it so much, we end up with less open space than we would have had if we'd kept it at 25%.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so we still
yeah, and
have
I
some
think-
options for what we're going to do. So, based on your conversation now, that's what we needed, was some feedback on, are we on the right track, or do we need to go back and kind of look at this again? And what I'm hearing is at staff level, we need to go back and kind of look at this again, and either that this might be one of those sticky wicket things that we have to push as a larger conversation after July 1, and just kind of carry over what we've got now, and then come back and do a deep dive into this.
I think, Julie, I think it's probably going to be one that boards want to go dive into a bit. So I think we ought to give the report out from this group what their preferences is, and that's what the report out is. But I think it is a pretty constructive conversation with the board, because this has been an issue, right? Open space. So
Yes.
I think we ought to be prepared when we talk to them about it, to take a pause on and make sure we walk through this one a bit with them. And if there's a get it right ability right now for our time with this board supports, then we ought to try and get there. So I think we ought to report out to them what's here, and see if they agree, or if they want to keep or modify. So.
All
And so
right.
Can I just make one last point on this then? So if I'm hearing at least what I'm trying to, I guess, to convey here is I would prefer to see, a lower density development have less of an open space requirement than a higher density development. In other words, if you're going to have the construction kind of premise of Carlton Point, then I would think you would want more open space allocated than if you're in, the lakes of Rolesville type of neighborhood. Because again, to me, even though if we just look at it from the sky, I'm taking away the difference between what's public space and what is private space, and I'm just looking at how much of the overall space is open. Because I think when I see what goes on during construction and after construction, the land is becoming a mess. And the fact that we have, and I'm going to get on the soapbox for a second, and then I'll let this back on track. But the fact that you can walk almost anywhere in this town and still see T-posts with silk fencing in the ground everywhere you go, it to me is just indicative of the lack of attention that I'm hoping we can address here, to where we can get things done properly and make sure there's enough land that doesn't reshape everything else around us. So that's kind of where my mindset comes from that kind of direction of having a requirement for more open space the more dense you get.
Hey everybody, this is Davian Cross. I jumped in just a few minutes, actually about 3 minutes after the discussion started, so I was able to get a scoop as far as what's going on all open space. Derek and Mike, I share the same sentiments as well as far as open spaces. One of the things I wanted to point out that Rolesville just recently joined the list of tree cities in Wake County. It's something that we have, the board has, commission, our community. We've worked very hard for years to maintain the green areas that residents just absolutely love. And I think that's one of the biggest appeal for why I came here, one of the biggest appeal for why future residents would like to get here as well. But if we start losing that appeal, I'm not sure exactly how the next 10 years is going to look like for Rolesville. If it's going to be, are we replacing greenways and green spaces, trees for more impervious lots and sidewalks and rooftops and balconies. So that's just my concern there as well. So I am actually supporting the conversation between Mr. Derek and Mr. Mike as far as these open space. And I just want to go on the record as far as where I am as well. Love to keep the density low, love to keep our green spaces high.
Okay. That's what we need to know. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
All right.
Julie, while we're in this cluster subdivision, I did have one more question. I noticed in the tables where it lists the for each of the RLD, RMD, and RHD, where it lists the density, front, side, rear, corner, and setbacks, the minimum widths and coverages, and then it's got the area. Each of them has a reduction in area for the cluster, but I didn't see a reduction in lot widths or setbacks for the cluster option. Is that something that will be or should be? I mean, most municipalities I work in, whenever you utilize a cluster option, you get some reduction in setbacks and lot widths to go along with the minimum lot area. That's part of what makes the clusters appealing. Is that something the town is looking at, or not?
You're right. Generally, there is a reduction in setbacks as the smaller lots because you need a buildable lot size, so you've got enough room to do what you need to do on the lot. It has not translated over the table. That is something that we need to look at. And I believe that we will have a reduction for the clusters as we move forward. We wanted to make sure that clusters are what we want to look at and what we're doing. So yes, that is coming. If we keep the clusters and we keep those reduction in setbacks will be on the way.
Okay. And I had one more question. I may have missed it. Is there going to be a minimum size for a cluster subdivision development?
There probably will be. And so that's part of the talk, is if we keep cluster developments, what we need to see and look at. So a minimum lot size, and then the setback reduction is usually about 25 to 30% in the setbacks. We'd probably keep it 25 since everything else is a 25% reduction, just to keep the math even and simple. But yes, we would be looking at all of that and going from there. So we'll keep working on the clusters. We'll keep working on this, and we'll report back to the board that we are trudging through this and see where they would like to be. I think from the board members that have been spoken out on open space before, that I think they're of the same mind, that they would like to see more open space, and how we get that and how we do that is part of this exercise, really. So we'll report back, and basically from the notes I've got is that we want to keep the low density. We want to keep the open space high. We want to make sure that we've got the appeal of the green areas, and that we've got the larger lots, and that we make sure that we're not trading the density for something that is not the vision of the town. So we'll take that, we'll report back, and we will rework this section. So we're going to move back to the PowerPoint and try to keep on going forward here. So moving on to the non-residential districts. The non-residential districts carry over. You've got your neighborhood commercial, which is your commercial outline. You've got your highway commercial, which is being kept the same. There's a small label change between the office and professional and the office and professional, so the ampersand. And we've added a new section called business, industrial, and technology, which will mimic in the comprehensive plan where we have the business park listed out for. And the reason why I'm turning my head is I've got the map over here on my wall. But in the land use plan, there is a section for a business park, and we didn't have a classification for that in the zoning table. So we're going to add that business, industrial, and technology so that when people want to rezone to that business park, we've got that section set up. And then, of course, the industrial district. So the commercial districts chart looks a little bit different. Instead of lot coverage, it's something called the floor area ratio, FAR. For those not in the planning world, the FAR is a ratio of the building's total floor area to the size of the piece of land upon which it is built. So we've got some great graphics from Kimberly Horn that help explain that in our section, and I'll switch down to that in just a minute. But some of the other things that we talk about in these charts, the parking and the height, whether we are going to allow taller commercial buildings by right. So I'm going to scroll down here. I think we were back on page 28 and keep on scrolling. Let me get there. So we'll use this, the commercial highway, as you can see what I'm talking about here. The FAR for the coverage here, we don't have a lot coverage right now, but we can add that in the future. So again, it's that placeholder, but the floor area ratio is typically what is done instead of the lot coverage for your commercial, your non-residential. So here we have the max feet, we have the maximum height of 60 feet, which is what you can go, the maximum height you can build in town, because that is where our life safety plan stops. So the fire suppression, if you put a sprinkler in the building, you can have up to a maximum of 60 feet. If you don't have a sprinkler system, the max you can do is 35 feet. Anything above 35 feet is going to have additional compatibility standards to make sure that the surrounding areas and the surrounding parcels are protected from that higher building. And we've got that chart kind of set apart for everybody. So you as we're going through the OMP, you see still we have the front, side, rear, and corner setbacks. We've got the lot width, and then the FAR is again reserved, the minimum square feet for the area. As we go through, so this is the new section. We've kept it kind of on par with what we would imagine for the business park and the lot sizes. So it's as you see here for the industrial, you've got a front setback of 30 and a side setback of 15. You've got a front setback of 30 and a side setback of 15. You've got a rear setback of 35 and a quarter setback of 25. Here you've got the 35 and the 25, and the width is the 100 feet. The area stays the same. So it's a classification that kind of carries over from the industrial. It mimics that. And again, this is going to be changed to BIT instead of IBP for the business and industrial and technology. However, that chart is there so that we can start having these conversations with companies that want to come in and have rezonings, so that they have a classification to go into, and they have the guidelines for that classification. With that, some of the call outs. I don't really have much else to call out. I think I've called everything else out. If you have anything else that you'd like to talk about or need to discuss further, if not, we'll move on to the next section. I think that goes back to the slide.
So you said the professional buildings were 60 feet, and that's what, 5 stories?
Yes, it's roughly 5 stories.
And then the industrial would be 3 stories, because that's 45 feet, right?
Yeah, so again, we can look at those charts. Oh, let me go back to where I was. Hang on, I've got to write down the page number so I can flip back and
42, I
forth.
think it was, or 38.
Thank you. So yeah, we've got a max of 45 feet for both the industrial and industrial park. Again, we can change that to 60 if we want to allow the full 60 feet, especially for some of the taller buildings, if you're doing some sort of manufacturing and you need a higher roof line. Again, that is something that, the max is 60 because of the life safety, and it does have to be sprinkled, and we can carry that forward. It's one of those things that are kind of up for discussion on what we want to see, the look and the feel of things.
And that is, when you say roof line, that means the tallest part of the structure, right? So, and I know we're not in downtown, but I know like spires on tops of buildings are always considered or debatable as far as whether they're part of the structure. So how does that factor into how this is interpreted?
That's a good question. For our measurement standards in another section of the UDO, we do have the measurement standards on how things are measured. And it depends on what the roof line is, on where that measurement starts. Anything that is like spires or towers or cupolas, that kind of thing, crosses on top of a church, they are not considered part of that maximum height. It is from the middle of the roof line and back down to the at grade. So that is basically the true height of the building. And so we do have that called out. I forget what section. If one of the Kimley.
Yeah, that's what I was
ones-
going for. James, do you have your master document open where we're measuring that standard?
Yeah, let me pull that up right now. I have it easily
So
accessible.
I'm doing the same. I'm going through the master
Yeah,
document as well.
I'm looking, and I think it's in, I know we've reviewed it. I know we've made comments on it. I just don't remember where it is. It's in maybe chapter 6, which we're going to get to here in a minute. Under design standards, I think it might be in there.
I think it is 6.1, Julie, if my memory serves me correct as I'm loading this open.
I'm just gonna, so
There's
here's
some of our
6.1 where we talk
Yep.
about building height
Yeah, determination
and,
of standards.
the highest
Nice job,
point of the
guys.
coping of a flat roof, the deck line of a mansard roof, or the height between the eaves of a ridge and gable, hip, or a gambrel roof. So the building height is measured in feet. So we do have these design and development standards on how we measure height, where we're measuring from, where we're measuring to. And just to give you that floor area ratio, since I'm already here in the document, this is the graphic I was talking about, where you have the lot coverage versus how the building looks on the actual lot. So if you have full coverage, if you've got, half of the lot area, but it's 2 stories. So the way they've built this chart, graphic, it's an infographic, I don't know, I'm not sure what to call it.
Yeah, I'd call it a graphic.
But this part of the graphic shows you if you've got how that ratio is calculated. So if you've got 100% in 2 stories, what that would look like if you did 4 stories, what it would look like if you did 8 stories. Of course, we're not allowing 8 stories, but it is to help give that visualization of this is the same floor area ratio, whether it's on, you've got the same square footage, it's just stacked differently on the lot. So how it looks visually, even though it's the same square footage of the building. So your floor area ratio built on however. And then we've got some density documents too, and graphics on, what the different lot sizes look like. So 6 units per acre is one of our, is part of the high density that we have. The 1 unit per acre is the low density, and then the 18 units per acre where the apartments and townhomes are allowed as part of the high density as well. So these show you the difference between what's your low density and what's your high density, just to help you give those visuals.
I love the visuals. It does help quite a bit.
Great. And so I kind of rambled on and right past the question of how we are measuring building height for the industrial. But this is where the section defines how we do height, how we do all our measurements. And so the rest of chapter 6 is all about how that design and development works together based on all the other sections of the LDO on where those rules and regulations are. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. I
welcome.
remember going over some of it, and I think that's where I picked up the number of stories per thing. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, and Julie, did you incorporate in this version the graphic where we're actually visually illustrating the stories and the heights? Because I say if y'all like these graphics, we got some really good ones coming up. These are kind of plain, but
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think they're in this version.
okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to slide 11. And so we've now that we've got the picture out of the way for the FAR, parking, where we're allowed to park. So we talked a little bit about height, so I'm going to come back to the parking. Where would you like to see parking in this lot layout? Because we're moving to kind of a form-based code where we have things, it bases on how it looks rather than what it is. That's the very quick and dirty way of doing form-based code. It's more about looks than what's actually in the building. So I'd like to get a preference on how you guys feel about that. If we have a parking center, like front and center in front of the building, like when you let's take Wake Forest, for example, as you're going up Rogers Road and you see the shopping center that has Harris Teeter, and you've got your buildings kind of set back, and you've got your outbuildings on the side, and the same across the street on Forestville. It's you've got your public set back, and then all like Chubby's Tacos and everything are on the side as the out parcels, and you've got the parking in the center. And then you can do the reverse where you have the buildings up front and you do the parking in the rear, and you have your buildings on the sides. So do we have a visual preference for what we're wanting? Because right now we do have some shopping centers like take Food Lion in our own town limits, where that parking is in the front and the buildings are in the back and on the sides. And I believe that we are proposing that as part of what's in our LDO, and what is in our current UDO. It discourages that and wants the buildings more front and center. A lot of the big box stores, a lot of stores that are coming in, they are in order to make the site more walkable, they would like the stores they'd like the parking in the middle, and then have the experience of shopping kind of on the perimeter, so that once you park, you can just go through the entire development and get all your errands done in the same place, and making it one of those kind of destination sites where you park once and you just walk through the whole development, rather than parking either on the sides and then walking to the buildings that are on the front, or parking in the rear and then having all your storefronts on the other side. So a good example of parking in the rear with a building on the front would be if you've been in Nightdale with the Rex Health building that was built. They have fake doors on the side of the road that faces the kind of across the street to Target and that shopping center. I forget what it's called. I think it's Water or something or other. But anyway, the front doors of that medical building don't work. You've got to go and you drive around to the back of the building, which is really the front of the building. And then you park in the back, and then you enter everything. So the doors everything looks reversed. So everything on that front side of the building where it looks like that's the front of the building, the sidewalk, the doors, all of that is false. It's a fire exit, but that's all it is. They keep those doors locked. Everything else that's really the back of the building, and everything is oriented towards the rear of the lot, so that's where the parking is. So do we have a preference on what we'd like to see here in Rolesville? Do we want sort of that?
Well, let's take example of what we have here in town right now. Let's look at the post office, for example. Are we
Mhm.
looking for more like a post office? We all know where the post office is here in Roseville, right? There's the Pizza Hut and all that stuff. That strip, or even where the town center is right now, the town board. Do we want that kind of appeal, or are we looking for more of the food line appeal, or are we looking for more of a neighborhood type retail where you're seeing, as Julia's mentioned, a very walkable, the building in front, parking in the rear. I am open. I don't really have an opinion on this. It just depends on what the density is going to look like, what the appeal is going to be. Because if it's a neighborhood, then that's going to definitely be a lot different than a food line approach, where you see a sea of parking lot
Mhm.
and then the
I
building.
Julie, what do
know-
you mean by in the middle? I didn't really get that. You said something about in the middle. You didn't say front and sides. It was something where you distinctly said you can have parking in the middle.
Yeah, so
The horseshoe.
like you've got your almost like a U shape
Okay.
where the buildings wrap around the parcel in a U shape, and then your parking would be in the front end at the middle, kind of like at Harris Teeter Publix up in Wake Forest on Rogers Road, or at Food Lion here, where you've got the parking kind of in the middle of the development, because you park, you come down, you've got the Dollar General, and you can pull in there and park, or you cross the little the right of way in the middle of the parking lot and then go to park if you're going to Subway, or if you're going to the Chinese place or the grocery store there. It's all, you park in the middle. And all your buildings, like your outbuildings, you've got the Los Tres Magallos over on the side, and you've got the parking there in the middle for that. So that's kind of what I'm talking about, is if you're parking in front of the buildings, and when you get out of the car, you're walking to the building, you're facing the building, rather than having the building and the parking lot reversed. So we would have Food Lion at the front of that development, like you would just flip it around, so that you would see the building first and then the parking would be hidden.
So
Hey,
that's
Michael McFarland, this is Kelly. What's Walbrook's draft? How does the Walbrook draft development look in those descriptions? Do you remember?
They have a mix.
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of,
Okay.
I mean, they, the plan is to have a sort of a grocery store anchor at one section, the southern side, where the building would be away from the street, similar to the Food Lion complex. But then some of the other sort of out parcels could,
Right.
I think.
They have the smaller buildings up front with parking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one thing that I think, so I'll chime in on first on the points being questioned here, but I want to bring in one that hasn't been brought up too. But I kind of like how Briar Creek is set up, to where off your main road frontage, you have these smaller, separate, smaller square unit buildings. Like if you took the post office, rather than it being a strip mall of like 10 units, you have like 5 small units. So there's walk-through space in between there. Then there's some parking lot. And then behind all of that are your big box kinds of stores. I kind of like how Briar Creek is set up, because it is a little bit more walkable, and it is a little bit more of a village oriented alignment. So in respects to what specifically as my personal preference is, large buildings in the back, small ones in the front, parking in between.
Yeah.
I would not like to see what you described in Nightdale. I would not like to see a false front unless it was a kind of a strip mall that has access from the sidewalk through the building to the other side where parking is. That could be something that I could see as an exception. But to me, what I think is more important than any of those things, which I think we have a problem here in Rolesville, which I think everybody's going to probably say yes once I bring it up, is the grade. I don't like the fact that Food Lion is below Main Street grade. I don't like that the entire.
What was that, Derek? Say that again. You cut out.
I don't like how the Food Lion storefronts are below the grade of Main Street. I don't like how the plaza over where the town center is below the grade of the street. I think the building should be at level or slightly above street level, because that gives a presentation for those business owners rather than this kind of dipping off the side of the road to go into these places. I think it's in any kind of shrubbery that we put, whether they're trees or bushes that we use to decorate the streets to make them look really good, are going to hide these places of business like they do right now over at Off the Hook and
Yeah,
everything over
right.
there.
Yeah, and a rise. So it gives a better visibility for the businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks good when you're coming into town or wherever you're
You
approaching.
see the activity, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I just don't like how our current, commercial businesses are located below the grade in a way. It just looks really weird to me.
Mhm.
Okay.
Just to piggyback on Derek there for a little bit too as well. I'm in favor of the buildings being set back and having parking in front. So I just wanted to be clear about that. Just again, it depends on where you are. It just depends on where the commercial space is going to be. If it's going to be in a subdivision or if it's going to be in a designated commercial area like where Food Lion and the post office are. Some things that the reason why I'm in favor of the buildings being set back and parking in front is because, again, logistically, trash pickup access, delivery truck access. It may not work for if the building is in front and then where people are parking, where trash is going to be being impeded upon based on customer activity. Also fire safety and evacuation impediments. Water runoff and terrain too as well, Derek, that could be the reason why that the landscape is that way. I don't know, but you did bring up a good point. It is really set lower than where the street levels are. But yeah, I'm more in favor of the building being back, parking in front. You can see it from the street. But I'm open either way, but it just depends on where it's being placed. Is it in a neighborhood or is it in a commercial center?
That's great. Thank you. And then that's where we come in with the form-based code on where we say the parking is, but at staff level, we want to make sure we're capturing the vision correctly. And that way we can make sure that the code is written so that it matches that vision. So this has been a great conversation. I think we've got our marching orders that, dependent upon design, that the parking in front and on the sides is the more preferable given how the site layout is, and to make those smaller attractive gateways into the development, like with Briar Creek. So that is what we needed, and I think we can move on. Thank you. All right, conditional zoning districts. We haven't changed much for conditional zoning districts. We're just making sure that we have an area to do conditional zoning districts. So we, as part of the general statutes, a conditional zoning is, let's back up. A regular rezoning is, you can take a map amendment, you can come in and you can say, I want to make this, I want to petition for this lot to go from a residential low density to residential high density. And that's just a there's no site plan review with it. You have to consider all the uses that are part of the R3 zoning districts to make sure that all uses in that map request will be in harmony with the area and will be in line with the comprehensive plan. And you look at every use that's allowed for that R3. If you say you come in with a map amendment for a conditional zoning district and you want to go from low density to high density, part of that request includes a site plan. So you get to see exactly what is being proposed on that property. So it's kind of a rezoning on steroids, if you will. It beefs up that application. So instead of having to look at every single use within that row 3 zoning district, you're looking at that site specific plan to make sure that that site specific plan that goes in the R3 zoning district will have conditions attached to it that are based off of that site review. And you can revise the zoning map based on that site plan that was part of the map amendment request. So a conditional zoning district gives you a little bit more flexibility with the code and with what you can require of your developers to make sure that the vision of the town, the comprehensive plan, the range of uses, the intensities, the standards for that development are all looked at as part of the map amendment request, rather than doing it all after it's already been rezoned. Because once you have a straight rezoning, any use in that classification that's considered by right is then, of course, by right. So what this does is conditional zoning districts allow that zoning to be changed, but it is dependent upon that site plan. So you're rezoning to that site plan specific and not doing all uses by right in that rezoning classification. So this section allows us to do that, walks us through how we're going to do that, what we need to do as part of that. A lot of it is carried over from current, and I believe that's around page 40. I'm on page 12. So this section is, a page and a half long. It just tells what we need, how the conditions are applied, what is considered a minor modification, what is considered, anything that's not considered a minor is then considered a major. What happens if it's multiple parcels, and then the process of getting the zoning map amendment through as a conditional district. So that is, it's language that's in there that's necessary, but it's basically dependent upon this chapter 160D-102, basically that says, we're allowed to do this and this is the regulations for it. And we put that into our ordinance so that everybody is clear on what their expectations are if they do go for a conditional zoning district. Any questions? Seeing none, I'll go back here. All right, so one of the things that we introduced just recently on January 5th of 2021 is that the Board of Commissioners, upon recommendation by the Planning Board, has approved a town center zoning district. Currently, the town has an overlay called the Town Center Overlay. What we've done is we've taken the overlay and created a town center zoning district, and we're in the process of removing that overlay as part of this update with the zoning code, moving towards the zoning district proper instead of an overlay. What is allowed in the town center zoning district is it's a mixed use, which allows a mix of uses. You can have residential, you can have businesses. You can have, whether it's commercial, retail, restaurants, a mix of office space that's not retail, but your lower level office space, your medical offices, your eyeglasses, your dentist office, that kind of thing, your lawyer's offices, your hair salons, your coffee shops, your banks. It allows a mix of use all in the same development. So that's what a mixed use district is. So we're proposing a kind of a tiered mixed use district. So the town center is going to be the most intense, allows the highest density, allows the highest buildings, allows the largest buildings. It's the most intense district. And the town center that was just rezoned takes that corner of Young and Main. So we're carrying over the provisions that were just passed from January into the town center mixed use LDO. It was done with the intent of being a part of the LDO. Kimberly Horn did a very great job in giving us a document that was well written to kind of encompass all the different aspects that we needed to get that passed and started as we were bridging that between current UDO and the future LDO. What we're introducing now with the LDO is those two other mixed use districts, the corridor mixed use plan and the suburban mixed use plan. Now, the corridor mixed use plan is going to be a little less intense than the town center. And then the suburban mixed use will be a little bit less intense than the corridor mixed use. So as you get farther away from the town center, you can still have your mixed use developments, but they will just be less intense. So it becomes more in harmony with the areas around it. So you don't have this huge town center type complex in the middle of your rural areas as you're coming into town. It does allow for those mixed use areas to be there, but it will make visual sense as you drive through because your mixed use areas will get larger and more intense uses as you go through and get closer to town center. And then as you move out of town center, you'll have those gradual step downs as well. So what we're proposing with the corridor mixed use and the suburban mixed use is that they be floating districts. And what do I mean by a floating district is that it's not going to be mapped out on the zoning map until someone petitions to be a part of it. So once they petition to be a part of it and they're approved at the Board of Commissioners meeting to have this mixed use district zoning, that will then show up on the map. Until then, we're not mapping out areas where we think this could be or should be. We're going to take that as a floating district and look at that on a case-by-case basis.
We have a question.
Sure.
So if you can go back to the other screen, or maybe I have notes here. So what would be an example of a corridor mixed district then?
So let me go. I'm going to write down my page number. Hang on. So you've seen the town center, Michelle, with your building heights being 35 feet by right or up to 60 feet with the design alternative and the sprinkler system. And the density can be 20 units per acre in a single use residential building. And you've got your building placements, you've got your front, side, rear lot lines, and the maximum coverage of the development. In the corridor mixed use, what you see is the building sizes step down, the setbacks start increasing, and your lot coverage starts to decrease. So instead of having here the 0 front lot lines in the corridor mixed use, you have a 15 front setback. You have more of a side setback instead of being a 0 side setback. In a 0 rear, you have more setbacks so that you're controlling the develop a little bit more. You've got more of a perimeter.
I'm sorry, I'm not asking really for the definition in that aspect. I mean, like as an example, so would it still be mixed use businesses, but the land use would be restricted?
It's a, yes, it's a mixed use district still, but the size of the buildings, the way the lot is built out, where the lot can, your perimeters, all that kind of stuff is a little bit more restrictive. So you don't have as intense of a development as you would in town center.
So what would you call something like Southtown Circle? Compared to what we're doing today, to the new definition?
This is a commercial shopping center. It is not mixed use.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's right. Oh, we don't have it then, okay.
Right. This is
Right.
a new classification, so there's not really anything to compare it to because this is all new. But instead of having, it's like a tier system. So you have a lower use, a medium use, and a high use, with the high use being in the town center, and then your medium and your low uses being on the outskirts, depending on what is surrounding in the area, to figure out how intensive that use should be allowed.
I'm just trying to picture a place in my head.
Because like you don't want a cobblestone type development coming along at Mitchell Mill and Rolesville Road. You want something that's going to be less intense there. You want something that's going to have the smaller buildings, lower buildings, less intense uses. And then you want that town center with, your apartment complexes and your 4-story apartment buildings and your grocery center and your coffee shop and all that. You want that at the town center because that's where your downtown is going to be. So that's a higher use. So you want that where it is now at the town center. And so you don't want to have the mixed use development that you're getting at the town center on the outskirts of the town, because that intensive use is not going to be fully supported, either by the transportation or by the neighbors in the surrounding area when you have the larger lot sizes. So you want to have that form-based code to allow that tiered system to really focus on how the look and feel of the development is going to be in a certain area.
And,
All right,
and
thank you.
Michelle, let me kind of chime in on something real quick, Julie, as well. And what we'll do between now and, I know we've got our workshop towards the end of the month that Michelle will get to participate in and see some stuff. But between now and our next workshop, we'll come up with a couple of aerials and locations that we,
Okay.
you can kind of ping on Google Maps and you can go, that's what it means.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll give you a couple of those.
I
Sounds
think
good,
that would
thank
be
you.
helpful.
Mhm.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so those are the mixed use districts that we're going to be introducing as
Julie?
part of this. Yes.
Doing a time check-in, how much longer do you think? How much more do you have?
Let's see. We have 6,
Yikes.
8, and 9.
Everybody all right? Buckle up, get through, see what happens.
We're good. We're alive.
Let's go another 15 and check in. Go.
Okay,
Julie.
well, we'll skip one. We'll skip around for just a minute because 6 is a longer conversation. Chapter 8, traffic impact. This is built on our current standards, and we're taking most of the current standards and not necessarily copying and pasting, but we're dropping them into the proposed LDO. There's not much changes there. The changes are, a formatting change, a little bit of sentence structure changes, adding language to make it flow a little bit better. We're not really changing a lot. Most of the traffic impact is done by we have a consultant who does the traffic analysis, the impact analysis, and then the consultant does all that for us. And there are some guidelines for those reports that are done. And when the biggest part is when we require a TIA. And we are not proposing any changes from the current UDO to the proposed LDO on when a TIA is required. So required TIA would be whenever you generate 100 or more added vehicle trips during a peak hour, or 1,000 or more trips added during a 24-hour period.
Kelly and James, this is Kelly. This will be a point that the board will want confirmation from you all if this is standard or not. There's always,
Yeah,
there's always a continuing question.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, and actually we've had, and actually I think you all are familiar with him, Travis Fluid and his team have actually looked at y'all's current standards and also compared that with some of the other neighboring communities as well. And, you know, based on their review, this is pretty, when I say pretty standard. They did make some, I'll say some minor modifications to this information, Kelly, but yes. And we will make sure Travis is available
okay.
when those questions come up.
And Julie, don't forget when you introduce this to the board to say that this is going to be required by the developer, but it's going to be, the client will be the town.
Yes,
So don't forget to
Yeah,
yes,
that they're gonna
introduce
pay
that
for it,
topic on the
right?
26th. Don't forget to talk about mention that.
yes,
So,
I will start with that.
we're in charge, in other words.
The other
We're in
question
charge
I
and
have
they're
on
paying
that
for it.
real
That's
quick,
right.
Yes, very much
back
so.
On the traffic studies, because they are questioned. Every single thing I've gone to, they come in as a question. Do we also add requirements for how often they're done, how many samples they're doing, and the times of day that they're sampled? I know there are standards that are followed, but I know there are specific, those questions are always asked in the town meetings when developments are being reviewed.
Yes, they are always asked, and we go by the general standards for a TIA. They are not spelled out in our UDO. And I'm not sure if we want to spell them out in a UDO or if we should, if we want to add that language, if it should be somewhere else, just in case something changes and or we need to make a change, and that way we don't have to come back through and do a text amendment to the ordinance if the next ITE.
So
My suggestion, Julie, is that, and Derek, that we put the requirements in here. Then your question, Derek, is the scoping. And to what extent is the scope going to be? And that should be in the process manual.
Yeah.
so that's where peak hour traffic would be defined, not in the
Yes.
UDO.
Yes.
So the
That's correct.
scoping will be that discussion, right?
Okay. And that's going to be easier for the town to change or manage or spell out specifically how to do it, because every single one that I've gone to is like, oh, well, when did you do this? Did you not
Right.
do it during,
Right.
when the school buses are running and when everybody's in line for Thales, and you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that's always coming up. And it would be nice to be able to address that in this whole revise.
Yes.
Right. Well, it's really the only negotiable in a true TIA, Derek, is because the TIA will identify what you just described. What's negotiable to some extent is what's the extent of the study and the impact. So, but everything you just mentioned would come out ultimately in the TIA. But yeah, it's well, never mind. I have a description I called traffic impact analysis, which is bad science.
Yeah, and
I never intend to offend anybody, but
Yeah. So Kelly
Oh,
has sent, I'm sharing my screen so you can see it, because Kelly sent me an example of that parking
we're
situation.
back in the parking. Yeah.
Yeah. So you can see kind of where, the streets are here and the buildings are here with the buildings on the sides. And then this is the U shape where you've got the buildings in the back and that. So I wanted to make sure that you guys saw that, since we're still, kind of in this situation where I can share my screen so that you can see how the parking is laid out. And then you've got your walkable sides here. So when you come down to the building, you go through, you shop all along through here.
Yep, that's what I like.
And Julie, I'm actually, and Julie, I'm clicking you here. I've got 3 or 4 more that I will send you that you can share with the steering committee after this meeting.
Okay.
And just kind of echo something that Kelly was just mentioning, especially when it comes to the transportation and traffic impact analysis. I always accuse our transportation engineers of having kind of that black box, kind of like, the old magic 8 balls, and you shake it up and ask the question and it spits out the number. I actually offended one of my transportation engineers when I said that once, but yeah, when you start listening to peak hour, they're looking between that 4 to 6 p.m. timeframe, and they're looking at what is that highest concentration of trips in 4 consecutive 15-minute blocks. And it could be 4:30 to 5:30 or 4:15 to 5:15. So, typically you're starting to look at some of that, especially when you get into your, like I said, your process, your more technical manual.
Get
All
ready,
right.
Michelle. You're going to get educated again with the cobblestone TIA. coming up your way.
Yes, yes. So
You think you know it all? Just wait for that one.
so in 5 minutes, we've knocked out another chapter. So let's go back to section 6 so that we can
Just one quick question. I know you said that
Sure.
the traffic impact study is not the things that we look for, like the times. It's going to be laid out where?
in the policy manual, in our
Okay.
procedures manual, not in the
Gotcha,
UDO.
okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So section 6, this is, we talked a little bit about it. We kind of went through section 6.1 already. 6 is where we keep all the determination of standards. There's some definitions in section 6. Going down here, hang on. So some of this is, the graphics that you need to understand what we're talking about. And then some of it is definitions. And so they might be moved over to the definition section, or they might stay here if there's something specific, such as the lot. The lot shows you the lot picture, but it also talks a little bit more about the standards and what you can do with a lot. And it's not just a lot is, a parcel of land where it's either vacant or occupied and you can do something on it. So that section where we have just like basic definitions, they might be pulled out into the definition section. It will come down to where it's best housed and how the information best flows as part of the LDO. So the setbacks and what a setback is, how a setback looks on your property, and the graphics to go with it. The blank wall areas, your frontage areas, what we mean by transparency areas. All that is mostly just definitions and how we're calculating everything. A lot of that has been looked at by the board and the planning board as part of the town center zoning district. We have a lot of the same graphics and a lot of the transparency areas, the blank wall areas you've seen before as part of that text amendment that just got passed. The signs, for the signs can be a sticky wicket. So that might be one thing that we basically take the language that we have currently, beautify it, get the new updated graphics in here, and then we talk about this at depth after July 1. And again, that's mostly because we want to make sure that we get this section right. So what we have currently can be transferred over, and then we can do that in-depth look at whether or not what we have currently is what we really need it to be. But that can happen after we get compliant with 160D so that we still have a zoning code come July 1. The sign areas, we've added, Kimberly Horn has been great about adding graphics and making sure that the visuals are very easy to understand, that you understand what where it is when we're talking about, where these, where we're looking at for, measuring sign heights and how we're doing it. Really good charts, graphics, and taking the information that we have currently and making it into a easily understood and readily found section of the code.
Now,
And-
one thing you're not going to see in here, folks, is references to like time and temperature or religious institutions or schools or making those kind of differentiations. And that is on purpose. And that's something, you know, the town attorney will also weigh in on, especially based off of the Supreme Court case that came out a couple of years ago with the Reed case. Basically what you're going to see is identify the type of sign, the size and how and where it can be placed, but you will not see anything as far as content or the use types or things like that.
Right. And so you can see the updated graphics. They look really great. They're crisp, they're clean. They make the code really stand out. You know exactly what you're looking at when you're looking at a picture and it says this is what we mean by a freestanding sign. This is what an A-frame could look like. You know exactly what sign you're looking at based off of the graphics. So that is very helpful. Section 6.3, we've gone rounds on this. We have basically made this ours already because you guys have been so good with it. We've done the buffering. We've done the, this is one that we didn't talk about in our group, was the mixed use perimeter compatibility, but we did. This is all pulled straight from the code that was just passed on January 5th of this year when we did the town center district. So this section is pulled straight from the town center district, and we're going to carry it on through all the compatibility transition areas. So that's been already approved and in the current UDO, so it's passing over to the LDO. We've talked about landscaping already. We have not
And
talked
if I
about
recall,
parking.
just as a quick note, is that because we were talking about shopping centers earlier, the new code is not going to have the kind of parking lots we have in Food Line, because we're going to have islands on whatever it is, like every other island, so every other aisle. So that was, I think,
Yes.
notable and a good change, so that we don't have these deserts of asphalt laying around the town. So I just want to point that out as a recollection.
Yes, thank you, because that I did gloss over that. There are changes to those standards to make it more form-based and make it visually pleasing, not just a sea of parking. So yes, thank you for pointing that out. So with parking, oh sure, go ahead.
On the parking, I noticed that they were showing the parking medians in the diagram. Are they going to be required everywhere parking spaces abut, or like, are they going to be every other? Is that going to be specified?
I do believe we specify when they have to be used. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there are specifications on when they're used and where they need to be placed.
Yeah, I think it had to do with the number of spaces or something to that degree. But yeah, so depending on how many spaces there were, if I recall, would then require at that point for islands to be used.
Yes, I just don't recall off the top of my head what that number is, but I believe there are standards in there that say this is when it's required.
Okay, I noticed one thing in that parking section too. It was a section that I can't recall exactly where I saw it, but it said wheel stops were required on all parking spaces. I think is that going to be required on all of them, or is it just when necessary kind of a scenario?
I'll have to double check. I think wheel stops are required when there's no curb and gutter.
Okay, and the spot I saw it in, it just said, I think it just, I forget exactly how it was worded, but it just said, it didn't really specify that. It just said they were required.
Okay, I'll go back through and look.
I'll try to.
Julie, it's 644. And it's actually referred to as wheel stops under that one, but it is basically saying, you know, if there is a either wheel stop, curbs, motor vehicle stops are similar to prevent vehicles from overhanging on or into adjacent property or from encroaching into required landscape areas.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, you would not necessarily have those, we'll say, on the face-to-face or the nose-in to nose-to-nose parking spaces. It's, you know, where we have those potential overhangs.
Okay.
Yeah, the overhangs right here. Thank you, Kelly. I knew it was in there.
Yep, as I'm got the big code up. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so, all areas need to be paved, that kind of thing. Let's see. The major thing, this is carried over from our current code. I think most of this is carried over from our current code. So a lot of it is, we know that it's going to be talked about in depth. We did carry this over from the town center parking as well. The town center parking went through debate by the planning board and the board of commissioners, and this is where they have landed and what was approved. So again, that is just carried over from what was recently approved on January 5th. And that is a very high gloss over of the parking. We've done fences, walls, and berms already. We've done lighting already. You've seen all this before because we've talked about it in depth. Some of the design standards. This is basically where we talk about how things are going to look. Where you can have your design elements and what kind of design elements they need to be, that you need to promote and enhance the pedestrian scale, that walls with a blank face need to face into the development if it's a part of the town center. You can't have large unarticulated blank wall surfaces because we've got that blank wall and transparency standard set. So trying to go through everything, where something might be called out a little bit differently than what we currently have on the books. Most of it is standard, and we've put in, again, good graphics to just really understand what you're looking at. If you don't know what some of the terminology is because you don't do this every day, like some of us, Kimberly Horn and I handle this stuff every day, but the rest of you may not. So it might be more difficult for you to figure out what we're talking about when you're reading through the codes. The visuals are always very helpful. The graphics kind of just give you that pop of, okay, now I understand what we're talking about. So going through and adding them in, like what we're talking about when you say an unarticulated wall or a blank wall, or where we're looking at, how it needs to be, how we're calculating the area, what materials and colors you can use on the outside of the buildings, where you have what we call out by multiple materials, where they're usually placed, that kind of thing. Different definitions for things that of design elements, your cornice, your recessed doors, your columns, calling out things and making sure that everything has got a graphic to go with it. And then a little bit more about your pedestrian pathways and where we have out parcel placements versus the principal buildings, and where you've got the parking in between, and how that's going to look from the streets scape, so that you've got your pedestrian walkways, so you've got a clear path through. You've got your outer buildings, you've got your principal buildings in the back, you've got your landscaped parking in the middle, so that you have a clear path, you understand what you're walking into, and it has a more visually pleasing aesthetic to it than just a wall of, I guess, basically parking here and then nothing in between, because there's no lights, there's no landscaping, and there's no clear direction. It's just a free for all in the parking lot. There's no real flow to it that you can just see from, walking in to the development. So you take those design codes and you really make a sense of place by using that form-based code, so that everybody kind of walks in and they're like, oh, this is the area that I'm in, and this is where we walk, and this is where we park, and this is where we do this. And you have that sense of place automatically. It just makes sense to your mind without having to figure out what's going on. So we've got all those standards kind of called out, where you need the materials, what kind of stuff you use, what we allow for, you know, where we're talking about with our distances of what we allow as the minimum and maximums and what we're talking about with heights. So those are, they're basic. When I say basic, they're basic and standard. There's not a whole lot to them. It's just, you know, the definitions of this is what we're talking about when we talk about this and this is what we expect to see. We're down to, I've got 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna kind of keep on going through. We've already talked about 8. For 9, a lot of 9, like I said, is part of the plat review, what we need to see in a plat, what constitutes a major and a minor subdivision, what we need to see when we're looking at all this, what we're looking at and what we're calling out on the site plans, the sketch plans, what we need to see, who needs to see it, how much of the area needs to be shown, and what needs to be shown on that area. If you're in the protected open space, you need to show the floodplain, you need to show the riparian zones, you need to show any wetlands, you need to show anything of significance, archaeological sites, cemeteries, that kind of thing. So it's the lists of all the stuff that we look at when we review the plats. It does need to be somewhere, and this section may be split up and most of it move over to the policy manual, the administrative manual, where it won't need a text amendment to change anything if something does change. And it's also a little bit more of just the checklists of what we need to see. Mike is very familiar with this with his line of work when he brings something back to us. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the code, but it does need to be in a handbook or a checklist somewhere. And so that's what we're doing right now. And this section is just, you know, what we're talking about is where we need to see things, what you need to see things for, and some of the allowable uses will stay. But some of this stuff that's talking about, you know, the legal instruments and what you need to do for a plat recordation and what you need to show, how we do that process, and what you need to see on the plats, that all, you know, the signature blocks and the owner dedication blocks and all that kind of stuff can be moved out to another manual, and that would make this section a much smaller. It would also make it a little bit easier to flip through, and you can just, you know, we'll point back to the manual saying, okay, if you're going to do a subdivision plat and you need to see the checklist, go to this part, and then you can have that 20 or 30 pages checklist on instead of having to go through the rest of the code to read everything.
Julie,
So-
Mike is unmuted. I want to hear what Mike's about.
Yeah, I had a few questions on this section, and I
Sure.
can really, but it was mostly to do with the final plats and who needs to sign them. And I know section in there for notarizing and just the placement of it. But one thing I was noticing, it looked like it had in there that the said after, or the subdivision plats would have to be couldn't be recorded until they were approved by the Board of Commissioners and then entered in writing on the face of the plat by the mayor and attested by the town clerk. Is that saying the mayor and the town clerk are going to be the ones to sign the plat before we record it?
I'm not sure. We're still looking at this section. It's
Those questions to you. I had
yeah.
5 in that area. Most of it was doing stuff like that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of this is carried over from our current code, which is ancient. And
Yeah.
so we need to make sure that it's, because a lot of our current code also still states that I need 5 copies and I need, you know,
Yeah.
we're not accepting paper copies.
Right.
We're not taking Mylars back. So there's a lot of things that, you know, as we pull it out and put it in the process manual, that's where it really needs to be housed.
What's easier for you, Mike? Phone call with Julie offline, or you want to send the notes?
I've typed up my notes and I'll send them
Okay.
to her. And I
Perfect.
got,
Thank you.
Yeah. Mike's been
All right.
good about sending me.
We would love to
comments.
modernize, so thank you.
Yeah.
And I had one question about this section too, because I'm not sure it was, at least for me, clearly spelled out, but being on the Open Space Greenway Committee, one of the challenges that we have trying to review development plans is the lack of a plot that shows just open space and greenway usage and plans. I thought I saw it in here, but I don't know if I saw it spelled out as clearly as, you know, we need a copy of your plans that just show, you know, how the development is going to incorporate the greenways, the open spaces, the playgrounds, the pocket parks, and so forth. Because out of all the developments that we reviewed last year, I think only 2 of the God, I don't know, 9 or 10 that were reviewed had that type of document, and it was extremely difficult for us to perform that role for the town.
Okay. No, that's great. And that should be housed in the process manual and what we need to see for all our technical reviews and how we need to see that. And so that is great input. Thank you. So I've got a note that for development review, the PARAB needs a copy of the open space, that you need it called out differently than just kind of in there on the site plan, that you need an open space and greenway section
We need
in
a
the
map,
development
yeah.
review showing
Yeah.
it called
I
out.
mean, yeah, having a totally separate map layer or whatever for that
Yep.
is extremely helpful because yeah, like, I've seen them for all the other stuff, you know, like you said, the wetlands called out and done, yeah, so it just saves a whole lot of time.
Yep. I've got the note and that's great. So thank
Thank
you. So here's where, you know, I'm flipping through all this because this is all the signature blocks that have to be on there, different signature blocks for different things. And then design standards on, you know, how a roadway is designed, what the classification is for the street, whether it's a freeway or an arterial, and this piggybacks off of the community transportation plan on what is, you know, what those classifications are and those definitions. They mimic each other, so they're in line. You know, what we expect for the street widths, and this is all standard, your 26 back to back, and your curb sections for different road sections. This is all kind of carried over from current standards. The charts have been updated to make
Hey,
sure
Julie,
that,
Julie, I
yes,
want to go back to the residential street with,
here.
this is Michelle's and my favorite topic, right, Michelle? Where is residential street width?
A residential street is called either a local street or a minor or major collector. It depends on how it's classified.
And
So-
local street,
Yeah, local street is probably what you're referring to as a residential street.
right? And what's the width in our standard?
A local is 60 foot.
Is that it in our current code?
That is in our current code, and it's being carried over from the CTP as well.
Right, is that standard in your experience? My only reasoning is, Michelle and I share a perspective. Our streets are awful narrow in new developments.
For right of ways, 50 is probably a more common right of way we see for local streets. And I think in this one, the section I was looking at had a note that if curb and gutters provided 50-foot right of way is adequate on local residential streets.
Yeah, that's right here on this screen. We've got it right here.
Yeah, and I mean that's probably the more common right of way width we see. And then you know, and then you still got the 26 foot of curve face to face. It's inside of that 50-foot right of way, so it roughly leaves I think 11.5 feet on each side from the back of the curb to the right.
Well, it feels okay from the Wild West where I came from. It's narrow. We had wider streets out there, and you could drive 2 cars down on trash day and not have to duck in and out of the trash bins.
They're very narrow in some neighborhoods.
My neighborhood is about, I think I measured it 15 to 20 feet. But this subdivision has been built around the 60s. So
Yeah,
different era.
there are existing subdivisions that were
Right.
done.
Well, the Heritage is definitely a thinner street, as is Villages and such.
And we commonly kind of joke or refer to that as impromptu traffic calming, but yeah, and Kelly, I know exactly what I mean, because I've been in a number of communities where we actually had I'll say the 50 or the 60-foot right of ways on local streets with upwards of 28 feet of pavement. And one of the things that we actually saw in some of those was, the increased traffic speeds and
I know, I
incidences. But I'll trust me.
Okay, well,
Yep.
then help me out on that. Let's
Yep.
go to sidewalks. I think Michelle and I would like to lobby for eliminating sidewalks and make sure sidewalks are on both sides of the street, right, Michelle? Yeah, there we
Can I-
go. So
can I
where's our sidewalk? standard?
I'm looking for it now. This is still all, I thought it
Can I
was
just
somewhere
jump right
close in
back
here.
before we go to sidewalks, if just back on the streets real quick?
Yeah.
Because one of the things I think, I know I speak for the other folks on the OSAC committee and several others, but my understanding is that we're trying to get the greenways to be incorporated into our transportation planning. So I would actually like to see greenways added to this list on page 223 as, you know, in some respect, in some way, shape, or form, because I think our minimum is 20 feet wide. And I think greenway, non-motorized 20 feet or something to that effect would be a nice addition here. Because again, I think at least one of the, and I don't mind owning one of my agendas here, but one of the reasons why I'm here is to get greenways to be a viable form of transportation throughout Rolesville. And I'd like to see that noted here so that it can be understood in that respect.
Hey, Derek, I'm gonna give you a little bit different take on it. This is Kelly.
Okay.
I want you to wrestle that through in the plan that's all ready to get started. And not necessarily, we can reference something in here that says shall be or follow the adopted Greenway plan, because part of what you're gonna go through in that Greenway plan that you're about ready to embark on is what are the standards? And instead of trying to create that now and here, I want you all to wrestle with that in that thing and make sure that we reference it back here and use it. But I don't think we're ready to talk about standards yet on greenways until we wrestle with it through the Greenway plan. And what you just said may well come out. But I think that's why we're doing that plan, right? Is really get to some standards.
And
Yeah,
Kelly,
and
I
I don't-
apologize. This is Kelly Klepper. I've got to hop off, but I'll catch up with Julie because I know we've got a couple of calls scheduled coming up here in the next little bit.
Go ahead, Derek.
No problem, Kelly.
So I hear you, and I won't disagree with it as much as I will just kind of question the concern. And I know the challenge that we have right now with Parks and Rec and open space and Greenway is the fact that that guide is what it is. It's a guide right now, and
It is now, but it's going to be adopted, and then it'll be the standard.
So it's going to carry weight because that's what our problem is right now. Is all it is just a guide, and
Yes,
nobody has
yes.
to do anything at all.
Yes,
Yes.
So the
what the intent
transportation-
is,
The
what the intent of the effort to
comprehensive-
make that, the intent of the effort that you're about ready to embark on is to come up with a plan that will be adopted. It will not be guidelines, it'll be in a carry standard, and those standards will be carried forward in development standards.
So because it's being called a comprehensive plan.
Okay, with standards, right?
What's that?
And then the second part of that is with design standards. Go ahead.
Mhm.
Okay, if that's the case, it hasn't been presented to me in a way that helps me to understand
Right.
that the
Well-
outcome is not just a plan, but it is
Right.
also going to carry weight that cannot be, handshaken around.
Right, okay, fair point. And let me verify everything I just said.
Okay,
And then get back to you and JG and I hear what you're saying, and it's exactly what I just said, what I just verbalized is my expectation.
and
So,
that's great, and I would like to see it go that direction,
Right.
but because of my understanding of what we have in place right now,
right,
everything is quoted as a plan.
that's right,
Because it's labeled as a plan,
right.
all we get to do is be 3 or 4 degrees away from,
That's right.
what actually can guide and control decision making.
Very fair. I think that's a very fair point. And I'm going to verify my expectation. And if my verification is true, then you count
we're
on
good.
it.
Yeah,
And if it
okay.
isn't, If it isn't, then I get what you're saying and we got to figure it out.
Okay, perfect.
And I can tell you that JG and I have had talks about the standards manual. So I know that standards are coming for greenways, streets, sidewalks, and that is going to be part of what the OSAG is doing. So
And what may happen, Derek, is that you'll do all that effort and then that piece could be shifted over to the policy manual and be part of the policy manual and development standards. I don't know yet, but
Yeah,
the
and I
expectation
understand.
is that's going to be the standard and we're going to hold to it.
Okay, because again, I understand that is kind of what we have been talking about in those meetings, but
Right.
like I said, you know, in the framework that they've historically been held, it's only, even though they're labeled in those old documents as standards,
Yeah.
they're still just part of what is quoted as a plan.
Right.
So I'm just, you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to make sure that, you
Yeah.
know, however it's labeled, it's going to be something that's going to be able to be followed and not, you
That's
know,
right.
retractable. So,
yes,
Perfect.
it will be enforceable.
thank you.
Hey, Michelle, look at that C, that second sentence on C, it says on at least one side, sidewalk shall be. So I think we ought to have a very concerted discussion with the board on whether they want to start thinking about two sides. And I mean, that's going to be a big change.
That is a big
But,
change, and the developers are going to give pushback on that.
Yeah, but you know what? If you have any type of housing or commercial on either side of the street and you only have sidewalks on one side, that poses a big problem because look at what's happening now at Averett Ridge.
Yep, I don't disagree. I'm just letting you
I
know
think,
that
I think what's interesting to me is that the sidewalks should, the sidewalk rules should coincide with those different phases of density. And that's what I find interesting is that they don't. This is just a general, you know, sidewalk ordinance. I mean, when you think about it, what I'm saying is like in the real congested areas, having sidewalks on both sides kind of fit, oops, there goes my mic, kind of fit the way that stuff is done. But then when you look at Chandler's Ridge, where it's a conservative neighborhood and you're coming out of there on Main Street, you have a different, you know, the character of your surroundings is different. And I think your sidewalk needs to match that. I mean, even
think
going
that-
out to the high school where all that new development was, I know the former mayor was pretty upset with that being just plain old sidewalk and not meandering greenway, because that's what his impression was going to be. And for something that's far, for something that is that far away from a more congested downtown area, it makes sense to have that type of fitted sidewalk. So I think this is interesting too. I think this is going to be a really debatable topic.
Mhm.
Here's what Mike Moss thinks.
Yeah, I was gonna say, most of the places I've worked in, it seems like the sidewalk on both sides of the streets goes in more correlation with the size of the street, as your local residentials would have sidewalk on only one side. And as you get into minor thoroughfares and major thoroughfares, you get more into sidewalks on both sides of the streets. Because a lot of the neighborhoods, if you've only got a street with 6 or 8 houses, that's where the developers are going to really get the pushback of putting it on both sides of the road. But when you get to a more of a major thoroughfare or even a minor collector going through a neighborhood, that's where you don't want people readily crossing the streets. That's where you would see it more commonly on both sides of the road.
Hey, James, do you have any resources that you can kind of go back and see what the standard is throughout? Because in my world, again, the standard was both sides in residential, just because of safety and connectivity.
Yeah, we can definitely pull some examples and even look to some neighboring communities of similar sizes. You know, I will say that just from a historical standpoint, like you said, I think back in the 60s and 70s, you often saw them placed on both sides. But as that development model changed, you've seen them go down to one side of the street. But you are seeing a lot of communities that we're talking to kind of having that pushback saying, oh man, we really miss having sidewalks on both sides. So, you know, there's a lot of discussion on that. So let us pull some information for you and we can share that with the group.
So I have a
Michelle,
question.
do you want to spend time on that one? With the board?
Right now, or?
No, with the board.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Because I'm just thinking, I don't know what the standard is now, in all honesty, I'm not sure, but I know in the villages, I remember I personally asked around the time that I first moved here, a couple of years after I moved here, and I recall being told that they only put the sidewalks in, this may be a little different from what we're talking about now, but they only put the sidewalks in as they complete construction.
Yep.
But then they completed construction and we never got the sidewalks. So I'm just wondering, how does that work? Is that what the general rule of thumb is? Wait for
No,
construction?
it should be on the plat. It should be approved on the construction drawings, and they should follow that. And then construction, as you said, our standard is as the subdivision gets built out, but there should not be a miss because there's an approved construction drawing.
All right, so yeah, I just think it should be on both sides of the street, because otherwise you may be crossing at one spot just to get to someplace that's so close to where that's a little further down the road, but you have to cross way over here in order to get to a sidewalk to get to where you're trying to go.
You're not the only commissioners mention it, so I'm bringing it up. I think it's a point that we ought to bring up on the 26th. Let
Okay, sounds good.
the board wrestle with it a bit.
Yeah, I think that's that's good discussion for the work session. All right. So again, blocks, lots, what you do with easements, what you do with utilities, what you do with stormwater. And again, stormwater is being looked at between the state and Wake County, and this is holder language until we know for sure what's going on. So some of it is unwritten at this point until we get the rest of it from the state and Wake County on what it is we're doing, so we can drop the standards in. And I have a meeting next week on stormwater to talk about the new updates. So we're actively working on that. It's just that we don't quite have those things dropped in just yet. But this is where it's going to be housed for the most part. And so that is
I'll just chime in one real quick thought on that. I think our standards should be much higher than whatever the state and county does. I think the town and the fact that we're built on so much granite, I've just seen a lot of destruction over the last 3 years because of the kind of construction that we have. And I just have so little confidence in the current engineering standards in stormwater management. And I would like to see us look at the possibility of being more strict on how that gets managed.
And we can look at that. Part of what we're doing right now is making sure that those minimums, currently our current code is more restrictive than the county, and it is more restrictive than the state. And we can continue that. We need to find out what those new standards are to make sure that they're at least lining up and that we're not missing a mark somewhere. But yes, currently they are a little bit more restrictive, and I've written down that you would like to see the higher standards remain and be looked at as we move forward.
Thank you.
All right, so with that being said, I'm going to go to my last slide here just so we know what we're doing next. The next section on February 18th, we'll review Articles 1, 4, 7, 10, and 11. Sounds like a lot. It's not really a lot. 11 is the definitions, so we won't be going over definition by definition. You'll just need to look at them generally and say, okay, this is how this section is laid out. Number 4 for overlays, it's kind of like what we did for section 3, where we're looking at how we're translating certain districts into the new districts. And so 4 will help with some of those overlays. And then 4 also houses the floodplain and the watershed overlays. So we'll briefly touch on those, but not too much, because the floodplain is dictated by the state as well. So a lot of that is state standards. introductions. It's a couple of pages of this is our LDO and welcome to it. And this is, this is where you're going to find everything. So that'll be very brief. And then number 7, for the special standards and specific conditions, this is where we lay out some of those extra stuff. So we should be able to get through the 18th in about 2 hours. If you are liking the current format, to keep the PowerPoint, if that's helpful, I'll keep on doing that. So you know what sections to call out, what sections that we're going to be talking about a little bit more in depth. So you're not reading another 200 pages, but you can just kind of briefly familiarize yourself in case you do see something else that you would like to talk about. With that, as always, my email address is on the screen. If you want to email me further comments, if you want to call me, please do. Again, this is very beneficial. While I was talking today, I wrote down 2 pages worth of notes of things that we need to go back, look at, talk about in further depth with the board. So that you guys are doing excellent work. It is very beneficial. I know that it takes out a good chunk of your day, but the town appreciates it very much. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your participation. And we only have a couple of more of these left before we get to the end. So thank you.
Hey, Julie.
Michelle,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kelly.
No, go ahead.
I was a little curious. Either one of you can answer this. With all of the, what have we been doing? What is that? The property that was in the ETJ that we moved over. What is that word again? Okay. How? Because I can't think of it. Say it again. Does anybody know? Yes, with everything that's been annexed in, how large is Rolesville now? Like circumference? We're about a little less than 5 miles.
I don't have the new figures. I can get them to you, but I haven't run any new numbers based on the new annexations.
Okay.
So I couldn't tell you what our new square mileage is.
And
That's actually a good question. That's a good question.
So, all right, cool. All right, Kelly, your turn. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, Michelle, I was going to tell you that since you're my boss, I was going to tell you, since I'm Julie's boss, I was going to let her go for a day.
Oh, have fun, Julie.
But I can't because she's got a 2:30 meeting with me here in 15 minutes. So.
Oh, make it a quick meeting, Kelly. She's tired. She's exhausted. Her throat needs some type of libation. Water, of course, is what I'm trying.
Water, yes. I need to refill my cup. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Julie. Definitely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And
All right.
again, super appreciative of your time. I don't want to keep you anymore since we've run 15 minutes late. Do plan on about 2 hours on the 18th. Come and go as you need to. I know schedules dictate whether or not you can pop in and stay the whole time. So please come and go as you need to. And then always look over the stuff and give me comments additionally anytime. I know Mike's done that for me, and that is very helpful. So send me in anything else that we either didn't get to talk about or you think about later. We want to get something in the hands by July 1st that is fully vetted and that everybody is comfortable with. So I appreciate everything you're doing. So thank you so much.
Mike and Michelle, during the meeting on the 26th with the town board and planning board, we expect you to carry the load.
You got that, Mike?
Yes. By the way, you're presenting, so my voice can take a break. So I expect you guys to do this since you've been with me all along. Davey, that includes you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right, David. You too. Yeah.
Can I just ask?
Derek, you get to go hang out on the outside there. It looks like so.
Oh my gosh.
You're free on the 26th.
I'll
All right,
wear the
guys, I have to
hard hat.
leave. See y'all.
Hey, Julie, have
Yeah.
people been complaining about the internet service? I had to leave one location. That's why I got kicked off multiple times to come to my office because the internet is just terrible.
Yes, we've had some internet issues here at the town hall too. I'm not sure what's going on, but there has been some connectivity issues. Yes.
Villages are bad. Derek, is it bad for you in the villages? Because that's where I was in my home office. I
I don't have any issues, but I am eagerly waiting for the fiber network for Ting to finish all their.
Yeah, same here.
Really waiting for that.
I don't have issues, but occasionally it may drop from
Yeah.
time to time. Other than that, it's fine when it's on, but it drops occasionally once a week, maybe.
Yeah.
Yep.
I couldn't stay on today, and I put up 2 computers, and none of them they would not stay. So I had to leave.
You gotta stop streaming all that old school music in the background. That's what
All
it
right.
is.
Chumbawamba.
You gotta put Motown.
All right, guys, take care.
Thank you, Davian.
Michelle.
What was that?
You gotta put Motown to rest, Michelle, while you're working.
It wasn't that. It was nothing. It was just work. So thanks, Julie. Okay, everybody, have a great day.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
Thanks, Julie. I appreciate all your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing.
All right, good talking with you again, Julie. We'll talk soon.
Yes, thank you, James, as always.
Yeah,
Thank
you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.